to the Funnel Reboot Podcast with your host, Glenn Schmeltzley. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot. Today, we're examining why we should invest in analytics. Whether you're catching this show for the first time or you've been coming back, it would be great to have you subscribing on your podcast app or by going to our site and signing up to get notified when future episodes come out. Let's get to today's show. Analytics is something that most people say they want. Some brag that they can slice data very well, but few people know the type of investment that's required to build a quality analytics function, and even fewer are good at justifying its value. Our guest is so passionate about analytics, as you'll see from his backstory, he is arguably one of the best people at articulating the business value of analytics. After completing a Bachelor of Science from the University of Manchester and studying at Cambridge as a doctoral candidate, our guest worked in the UK analytics practice of a global management consultancy. Due for a change after 6 years, he moved to Canada and founded his own consultancy so he could offer a more independent approach. A while later, he started the firm Bronson Analytics. In 2018, he began a recurring event in his hometown of Ottawa called Beer and Analytics, which draws hundreds of people from the field together for some learning and socializing. And in 2022, he started to branch out to places like Toronto. Let's go meet Martin McGarry. I'm very glad to welcome Martin McGarry. Welcome to the show, Martin.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing
Thanks for having me on.
great. Oh, my pleasure. So, Martin, can you give us, in your own opinion, what you think some of the big changes that have been happening in analytics over the last couple of years are?
I think the fact that there's so much innovation on the cloud that something that was a very bespoke or niche area has become mainstream. And I think it's super exciting. It excites me as a mathematician and scientist as my background. And as I work with my business users, it excites them too because the world of self-service analytics, meaning when people are actually in business lines, whether it's marketing, HR, finance, can actually use some really, really powerful tools themselves. And it's somewhat, I wouldn't use the word commoditized necessarily, but it's become kind of um, all-encompassing, and people can use them from every walk of life, which is really exciting. I think that's the single most important change in the world of analytics.
All right. So, when we talk about the cloud, the first thing my mind goes to is the fact that there can be a very large hard drive, and it doesn't have to be here on my computer. It can be somewhere else in a data center.
Sure.
I get the feeling, though, that you're saying there's a little bit more than just a place for storage. Are there other tools, applications, pieces of logic that are being brought to the everyday user now that do happen to be somewhere else on some other computer, but they're also making things far more powerful?
That's right, Glenn. The storage component, and obviously what Amazon did 15, 20 years ago with S3, that kind of set the scene. And since then, people have been moving not just data, but applications, middle layer, um, messaging layers all to the cloud, which is really transformed thing. The full stack is in the cloud. People talk about um, moving to the cloud to reduce cost. No, that's not really what people are doing. That was an initial driver, but all the innovation is in the cloud. If you're not in the cloud, then you're not taking part in this renaissance of analytics.
Sure. So when we look back prior to how things were then, um, there were a couple of enterprise packages which people just had to buy, and they were, to my mind, extremely expensive. So you've talked about the cost component, but do those monolithic packages, the you know SPSSs and the SASs and some of the Adobe stuff. I mean, do they do they still have a place? What do you think has happened to them in light of the fact that the whole architecture underneath the scenes has changed?
Yeah, so obviously a lot of those packages haven't changed themselves. Some of them have been attempted to move to the cloud with APIs and such. Um, SPSS, I used SPSS 30 years ago, and prior to IBM buying SPSS, and yeah, I used it for my science. It was a great tool back then. I used Lotus 123, and I was using SPSS, and I was doing design of experiment and t-testing and all that good stuff with SPSS.
Right.
Um, and as
Good
a
times.
scientist, yeah, good times. And it was very clunky, and just
Yeah.
even moving data around and getting data in the right dimension to use, and cleaning data actually wasn't even something you could do in the analytics tools. So you had to
Hmm.
bring clean data. If the data sets were very large, then you basically couldn't see what was going on. You couldn't see your dirty data, and I think that made things really difficult, really, as a scientist back then. But what's changed is the tools to be able to manage the big data, to do that data cleaning, to make sure we get in a position where we can do analytics, is really, that's to the fore. Now the final analytics parts can be really quite straightforward if you have data in the right dimension. You've cleaned your data, you understand what's going wrong with your data, you're merging multiple data sets, or whether it's in marketing, is a very good term. Like, you've got, what's the version of the truth when you bring in data sets from, I don't know, your web forms and your CRMs and all that good stuff, and you're like looking at the data and thinking, oh wow, how do I clean this stuff up? The vendors themselves have built some of those cleaning techniques, like simple duplication techniques, into their applications. But if you want to do something more complicated, then there's also self-service tools like Ultrix and Nime, and there's a bunch of others on the cloud providers provide, that you can actually do it yourself, and not necessarily need to use some of these really enterprise scale tools. You can do it yourself.
Yeah. Or and perhaps you included this in what you were just mentioning there, but APIs are a way to do it on the cheap to get at least the data that is visible from point A to point B, and then do the rest of that blending and joining as you
That's right.
talked about.
Yeah. And like in the marketing sphere, I think there's some companies that are basically just specialized in doing that, using APIs to connect to the source of the truth, and then do the cleaning, and then uh, serve it up for you to do whatever you want to do with it.
Yeah. I suppose underneath all of this, uh, for companies to make these kind of changes and glean the insights from them, there needs to be a bit of a mentality to it. They need to, I think, number one, consider data as an asset. And I'm wondering if in your time working in this field, I mean, you jumped, as you say, out of um, uh, one profession into analytics. So when you did that, it's clear that you saw data as an asset. Um, I'm not sure if that was the view that you were met with when you first started telling people that you wanted to work on their data. Uh, can you tell me what you saw then and maybe what you're seeing now and whether or not there's been a change?
Oh my God, it's been a crazy change. Um, Absolutely crazy. So back if 15 years ago, I was talking to people in organized, large organizations, including the federal government here, and people just really didn't, these were senior leaders, directors, director generals, VPs, and they just didn't see data as a strategic asset. They were making decisions on whims. Sometimes
Right.
were data driven, but data driven and the data wasn't right. Um, they were looking at, they didn't understand what a KPI was. And even today, some people really don't understand what a KPI is versus just data points. Um, and people spend a lot of time looking at the incorrect KPIs and data
Yeah.
points. Um, but there's been a change, there's been a structural change. I think in Ottawa, I would say maybe 5, 6 years ago, the whole deliverology thing, which I rolled my eyes at a little bit, but it did create a bit of a change in perspective for a lot of policy people, to think, okay, data is an asset, and then since then, actually, it's become even more important. Um, without buy-in from leadership, then a data-driven approach just never really actually happens.
Yeah.
The
No.
data ends
Dead
up
on
being
arrival.
yeah, it's dead on arrival. So I do see a change there. Obviously, some industries are faster to take to this than others, um, for either for structural reasons or competition reasons. But yeah, there's been a massive change. Industries are at a different stage of their understanding of how to deal with data.
Yes. Do they always have to bring themselves to this conclusion, or have you either seen others do it, or have you been successful in sparking that interest in them and helping them see it? One of the things that I consider you well known for is your talk about simulations and how,
That's
if
right.
you have a body of data, you can have it modeled and possibly make predictions about what might happen next. I would think for someone who hasn't seen the power of data, that might be enough to get their interest going. Uh, is that your
Yeah, so
experience?
simulation is an interesting one. It's not quite as sexy as AI, and it's not as common in the media, whether it's social media or the old-fashioned media channels. But it's super important. I think what people don't realize about simulation is simulation can model the future that's not necessarily based on the past, whereas AI is really basing things on everything in the past.
Right.
Um, Simulation is, I feel, is a underused tool. We've used simulation in a bunch of clients, and some with spectacular results. For instance, we did a simulation of a parcel sorting facility, a very large one that was coming into play in Canada, and the actual to get that plant into operation, if you just went live with it, it would take many weeks and months to optimize how the plant should work with forklifts and how much stuff's coming in, how much is going out. And what we were able to do was use simulation to completely remove that stage. So we saved millions of dollars by removing the stage of saying, okay, how should this plant work? So we simulated the plant and optimized it long before the plant was actually implemented. So once we had operations in place, it was somewhat close to optimized. And that's something you couldn't have done with, like, even with AI, you wouldn't be able to do that because it was a new plant. It's not we
Right.
weren't
Right. There is no
simulating.
historic data to train it on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um, are are multiple or maybe hundreds of simulations running at once, and then they're being compared against each other? Take
Yeah,
us
that's
through
right.
a little
So
bit.
it's somewhat technical, but obviously a Monte Carlo approach where you run all of the probabilistic outcomes from whether it's a small process or large process, you aggregate them together. The technical term is discrete event simulation, and you use the probabilities of each one of those events, and then you manage what is the actual output. And you see bottlenecks, you see magnificent outputs. Um, a bit of a funny story. I did have one client here, which was a federal government client, where we were asked to simulate the process flow. So
Yes.
it was a paper process, so we simulated it, and the directors and above were always, and the ADM was talking about this, the senior people were talking about, okay, we need to optimize this process. We don't know what operations is doing, but it's taking far too long. Things that should take 2 months take 6 to 9, 12 months. And so we did a simulation and looked at where the bottlenecks were, and the summary, the output, the was the fact that the reason that things took so long is because the sign-offs by the
Oh my.
directors and above were stopping everything else. So
Right.
that kind of, we didn't have much discussion thereafter because it was a report that was very clear, and I can't make this stuff up. It's all fact-based,
No.
and
Right.
so
Right.
the
You.
fingers pointing at operations were quickly turned to look in the mirror themselves. So, and obviously, and that was quite an amusing one.
What was it?
I have
Pogo.
another.
We have met
I
the
have
enemy, and it is us.
yes, and then there was another one which was a very large process where the government had estimated that the program would take 20 to 30 years to complete. When we simulated how long under current conditions that the process would take to complete, it was more like 200 years. And again, it was all to do with breaks. It wasn't to do with any bottlenecks per se. It's just like decision making takes over.
Wow. Amazing. When it comes to the capabilities, do you think there's anything that we're still waiting on the people who make these tools to provide us with? Are you ever finding that for what we can do now, we may still need more accessible tools or tools that don't need someone with um, a mathematics background or as strong a mathematics background? What do you think we ought to be looking for to have this analytics capability kind of be available on a more democratic basis?
Yeah, well, you've teed me up well there, Glenn, because yeah, obviously, the whole a lot of people are terming these tools no code or low code.
Right.
But actually, when you look at them from an objective perspective, these are not low code, no code solutions. And there's just not enough of those no code solutions for the average business user or democratic citizen data scientist, whoever, the average guy at home that wants to look at the pool. Or there's just not enough of those tools around. There are some available. Some of those are still fairly expensive, but the it's an area that's got to grow. If you think about what are the initial self-service tools, I'm going back a bit further here, but
Right.
people needed to know what time it was, so the watch, and then there was the calculator. I could calculate things myself, complicated very quickly, and then
Yes.
the ultimate self-service analytical tool is really Excel. Excel
Yes.
became ubiquitous, and everybody loves it, and they think that is the ultimate tool. And obviously, there's some serious issues with Excel with regards to how it functions and how it catches errors and being able to see data when it's millions of rows and actually just handle data locally. So I think we need more self-service analytics tools that become more mainstream, like Excel did, but on a
Yes.
much higher capability level. And that's really what we need.
Yes, I mean, I think we're probably not too far from if we look at how voice assistants or the ubiquitously known ChatGPT interface is there,
Sure.
that those tools could act as an interface for us to understanding data rather than us looking at a complicated user interface or, God forbid, a terminal shell where we have to
Yes.
know the command lines to tell it
Yeah,
what to do.
for sure. Yeah. So there's no doubt that other user interfaces like ChatGPT or others, or just something that can use some standard language could help
Right,
people
right.
get there. Whether it does the analysis itself or guides you through what you should do and how to do those checks. Obviously, a user interface could get things wrong if it doesn't know context. Um, so I think people will still have to be involved and check outputs. So I do have a few concerns there. Obviously, when it comes to data bias and data, which can
Yes,
be an issue, or is an issue. And
yes.
so yeah, it's how that materializes. I don't have a clear roadmap myself, and I don't see a lot of vendors having a clear roadmap. But this is an organic process.
It is. And we as organizations are evolving. Um, I think the other side that we have to be ready for is once better data or insights are available to us, we need to have a culture that says, right, we've just found out that we've been doing a lot of things wrong. Now we need to go in a different direction. And you need from the top to the bottom everyone's acceptance that that's what the data has now revealed.
That's right, and I have concerns. I know there's a lot of people have concerns about using AI in particular for certain processes. An obvious one is HR processes where
Right.
biases can be inbuilt. Like almost see that in the opposite direction is how do we use AI and actually move things along faster and make sure that we design for those potential issues with the historical data. And maybe simulation can help there because we can actually create um, artificial data. So you can actually use
True.
simulation to create data that creates historical data that can be balanced. So that there are processes that you can actually get rid of those biases and still use AI. I think the problem with some organizations is if they become too risk averse, then the risk of not doing something is actually far exceeds the risk of doing something.
Yes. Yes, for sure. I want to broach what we do also, knowing that we have some trillion-dollar tech giants which have a large amount of this data that they hold on to themselves, and that we don't necessarily have as much uh, of the right to our data as we think we do. But before we get into that, I want to take a very quick break. I'm breaking away for a moment, and I have to say that I couldn't do this show without your incredible support. And I hope you benefit from being part of our Funnel Reboot community, and I want to remind you of some free ways that you can help get the most out of it. You can keep up to date via social media. Take your pick of Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. We're on all of them. They each carry different content on what we talk about here, and they have highlight clips of guests who appear on the show. If you want to be notified of new episodes, visit funnelreboot.com. It'll give you a form for being emailed when each new show is out. Our website also has links to many of the podcast apps we're found on. And once you pull up the show on your app, I'd love you to subscribe to it. Lastly, if you know someone else who'd get value out of this content, please share the show's URL with them so they can do the same. I hope that along with listening, you'll consider joining the email list, following us on social, or subscribing and sharing. And thank you for being part of this journey. Now let's get back to the show. All right, Martin, there are, I guess I'll call out the elephant in the room, or elephants. And these are those Silicon Valley companies. Could be anywhere from Google to IBM to Microsoft, Salesforce, Adobe. They're all very large companies. They all hold on to a lot of data, and the data is actually what has driven their market capitalization and
Yeah.
done so well for them. So at a certain point, we reach an impasse where their interests and our interests aren't aligned anymore. I'm wondering if you can tell me, how, as a consultant to groups that are trying to use their data for themselves, you think we can look out for our own interests while we're sitting atop these entities that are clearly looking out for theirs.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I don't think we talk about it enough. I remember maybe 4 or 5 years ago, everybody was talking about this: who owns the data, who's making money off the data, and the classic: if you're not paying something, you're the product.
Right.
Um, and like, it seems as though those kind of discussions have disappeared a little bit. They come up now and then, but I think as uh, different generations move through this stage of they start to accept this more, and these things tend to be cyclical, and I believe that we will start to get ownership of our own data more. How do we access the data that we've already given, and how can we use that ourselves? That's
Hmm.
a really difficult question because there's technical impediments for us to retrieve our data or even cleanse the data. I don't know if you've ever tried to remove yourself from one of these big providers. Like I'm, I haven't myself, but I've talked to people who have, and it's very problematic. And it's your data, so it's part of who you are. And I think people are
Yeah,
aware
and
of it, but it's
yeah.
not. It doesn't seem to be right in our face anymore.
Well, and it's also very decentralized. So the one example I would give is I think I've got a reminder on my calendar once a year to go into Google Takeout. So that's a service where they are um, I think their word is liberating. You can liberate your data. They're still holding on to it, but you get a copy. And my goodness, it goes on for pages and pages, the different individual permissions you have given to, not only one Google product, but how much of what you've told one Google product can be shared with another Google product. And it gets very complicated very quick.
Yeah, for sure. You need a network diagram to figure that out, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And what you
Uh,
don't know is, and I'm sure there's stuff that's not in there too, like that's problematic.
sure,
Yeah,
undocumented. Uh, we ourselves as organizations, we can run afoul of that too. Privacy regulations
for
are,
sure.
you know, meant for orgs of all sizes. So, to be fair, if we're holding on to data on behalf of our clients or stakeholders, um, we may be laughing and poking our finger at the big guys, but we may find we have to do something similar, like an inventory, to determine if we were asked by someone to expunge all their data. How would we do it? Could we do
Yeah,
it? So
yeah,
this there's a little bit of we're in an adolescence right now, and I think there's a little bit of maturity we needed um, to have those conversations. So the data's kind of scattered all about. But I guess the other thing that I'm also aware of is that if it is scattered about and we don't know exactly what's in all the different places, logically we're not. There's no possible way we're making the most use of it, right? If we don't even know what it is, it's like
yeah.
flotsam, right?
If it's
Uh, we have to
fragments
go
of data,
pick it up. We have to get it off
yeah,
of just floating along on the water there. We got to pick it up and sort it and inventory it and then
yeah.
realize what it can do.
Yeah, no, I think obviously as you go back in time, the temporal nature of some of these systems that are logging and your data's from the past is, I call them fragments of data,
Yeah.
whether it's shadows or fragments. But yeah, so there's not much we can do about that. What's the value and what's the negative impacts of that? I think you do a risk assessment of what the impacts are. At Bronson, we're going through the SOC 2 security process, which has some implications on data and logging data assets, and we for reasons of protection and logical reasons, we try not to keep data. So we did a very large project with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We
Yes.
collected all the data from churches and Library and Archives Canada, and Bronson ourselves. We made sure that we basically couldn't keep any of that data ourselves, and that's good as long as the entities who we got the data don't destroy the data. So sometimes they come back to us and say, "Do you have this data?" I said, "No, no, we destroyed it. That's what we're supposed to do." So that's kind of amusing at times. They can find it most of the time, but yeah, it's organization and but like I'm just risk averse. I just say, okay, well,
Yes.
I just want to not have that data. Why should I have it? I may have it for the duration of the project on thumb drives and things like that. But then I'll make sure that we don't have that those shadows or fragments of data left afterwards.
Yes. So it takes like a life cycle
Yeah,
mentality,
life
right?
cycle management.
As it's being born, you're trying to figure out, okay, what would it look like at the end? Um,
Yeah, and
does
all these processes have been around for so long in information management and retention schedules and all that. So
true.
yeah, we should look to the archivists and the information managers of how they for best practice, and it's all there. It's a mature subject.
True, but for those on who have been on the periphery, like marketers,
Mm,
it's new to them.
it is, yes,
Do
yes,
things
very.
like encryption or maybe hashing of the most sensitive columns of information, do you think that those are good tactics?
Yeah, and I think a lot of those you asked about what technology is being built in. Like I think those kind of technologies are being built into a lot of certainly enterprise scale.
Yes.
Whether they're built on the tactical scale or for small marketing groups, I've seen some of those. But I have seen a real movement in that direction to improve those kind of masking techniques. And it's great to see because we used to have clients who ask us about, okay, how can we mask? And then we basically build a process to mask them, whether it's hashing or just blanking or removing or doing some kind of join that you could join later, which is
Yes.
horrendous. Obviously, it's not value add. But now there's actually true enterprise scale techniques to do that, which is great to see.
Right. So if we look for them, we should find them, and
You
then that
should.
means we should
Yeah,
use them.
exactly. Good point.
Um, the changes that need to happen inside of our organizations, I imagine you probably feel that there aren't enough people who are bearing the role of maybe data retention or maybe even to be the analyst, to be the person who is charged with transforming, an organization by pointing out the information that is right underneath their fingertips. Are there changes either that you have seen or that you want to see in organizations so that they can get a little bit more data centric?
It's quite interesting, Glenn. Is data professionals and policy people, we often find it very difficult to influence change at the top of organizations because the organization head has his own beliefs or ideasms or ideas of how they want to do things and whether data is important or not. Um, but I think when you get to the point where it's in popular media, when people are losing documents or documents are being found at Mar-a-Lago, or I know Obama brought in the very first mandate on actual retention schedules in the US,
Yeah.
and some of those large cases of losing data or some of the stuff that was negative with regards to Cambridge Analytica, then
Yes.
those are the things that are actually driving true change in the organizations. And soon as it becomes to the bottom line and people are aware of things, then or especially on the negative impact side, then people start become risk averse and start realizing, hey, I do have an issue here, and I'll do something about it, which is terrible, really. But that's the way the world works, I'm afraid.
Sure. I mean it's a little bit like uh, if data is an asset and we're elevating it, its importance, it's like an object that we're putting up high in the air and it's now got the ability to fall. Uh, so we have to remember that we are,
Or be stolen by a
yeah,
foreign
that
entity.
right, that we're if we consider it important, we're not the only ones who consider it important, but as well for it to be, for example, consolidated in one place certainly raises the likelihood of, if a breach were to happen, that
That's
the
right.
impact of that breach is much bigger than is if it were kept in all of its disparate little partitioned places.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that. So we use password tools to centralize passwords as a good example.
Yep.
If quantum computing all of a sudden makes those passwords
Right.
available immediately because they can be cracked in an hour rather than 300 years,
Right.
then that becomes an issue to everybody. So that's way above my pay station, but I do worry about that. And um, I it's centralizing can also be a problem as well.
Well,
And
just that every system has an Achilles heel.
yeah, yeah, that's
We
right.
have to we have to be mindful of that. Um, Analytics is something that you've obviously been, greatly tied to. You've made it your business to get other people together to talk about it, to read about it. Um, are there any kind of sources of inspiration, either places or books that you go to for refilling the well on analytics?
Yeah, so I follow a lot of people on LinkedIn as great resource. Like there's some great resources. If you're new to analytics, I think start following some folk on there. I think it wouldn't take you too long. Um, if you want to delve a little bit deeper into AI and understand what AI is, there's a guy on LinkedIn as well called Andrei Burkov, and he's got a book called The 100-Page Machine Learning Book. I do find that a very useful starting point for somebody who's semi-technical. Probably not for someone who's just churning out marketing materials and trying to understand what analytics world is, but somebody in the marketing world, your listeners, or in business lines who has a science background or some kind of technical background, then that's a great starting point. But I do encourage. I think LinkedIn is a great resource. There tends to be less negative noise on LinkedIn, and there's a lot of great blog articles and on Medium and other sides. But yeah, maybe I can follow up with that.
Sure, that's great. We'll include that in the show notes. So, Martin, when it comes to what analytics has meant to you personally, know a little bit of your background. We've known each other for a bit. I know that um, obviously, coming from the UK, which has been abundantly clear by speaking with you,
Yeah,
you had some time working in a management consultancy, a global one at
that's
that,
right.
working on analytics. And now, of course, you are in more of a boutique type of setting where you're able to have an impact, but with a small footprint. Um, do you think that the way that analytics can be delivered now is more like the way that you have done it? Do you think that, this is a good change that is happening, that now it can be done by mere mortals? You don't need to call a big five, big six group to come in and, for a very high ticket engagement, come and work with you on analytics.
Absolutely, Glenn. Like things have changed. So 20 years ago, I worked on what was effectively a machine learning project. It wasn't called machine learning back then. It was an optimization project with a telecommunications company in the UK, and utility firms too. So we were using tools which were like enterprise grade, and they cost millions and millions of dollars to build and maintain, and it was almost impossible for the normal man to, or even a medium sized business to actually use.
Yes.
We have come so far away from that. It's super exciting, and it's why I started my whole the beer and analytics. You mentioned it at the start. My networking event, which I love because I love getting ordinary people together and talk layman terms about analytics and get people to meet vendors who do some amazing things, like Data Robot and others. And it's really fantastic to be able to talk to people in a relaxed setting, network, have a drink, and talk about data. And
Yeah.
yeah, those tools are there, and everybody can use them.
Yeah. And you can hear from someone who says, I've used that tool. Maybe it's going to be helpful for you. And at that point, compared to 20 years ago, where your decision was, okay, step one, write a business case, work up 4 levels of management in my own organization to try and get the funding for this. Now it's, hmm, I have a credit card. I can put it on this. I could even get a free trial. And for a really small investment, I can figure out for myself if this is going to help us.
Absolutely, which is amazing.
Like,
So the
so,
automatic,
so
yeah.
low a bar when you think about it.
Well, I think that obviously that's why people have concerns about that because any tool can be used. A fool with a tool is still a fool. I
Yep.
don't necessarily like that term, but it is evocative. Yeah, you do need to understand what the outputs mean. So if you don't have a fundamental understanding of statistics, or when you're doing some complicated analysis, then you could come up with the wrong result. But
Yes.
yeah, the tools are there, like, and it's not as though you need less understanding of that than most people realize, and that's why we're here to help. Obviously, um, love to talk to anybody in your podcast if they have any projects they'd like to do. We're great at merging data, finding outliers in data, and creating data workflows that you can run yourself. So that's what I try to do, and I don't try to be wedded to the organization. We love to do projects, hand them off, and feel good about that, the fact that we've created a project that can live on with the users.
On that note, if people want to find you and get in touch, where would you send them?
Yeah, bronson.ca. You can go there and you can send a web form. Email addresses on there, and feel free to reach out.
Martin, I want to thank you so much for your time. It's been great.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, I'm very happy to. Probably tripped over something in what you said that can help them make their marketing even better.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.